Okay. Uh, Good evening and good afternoon to all. I, on behalf of the TiBLANEI, welcome all you to the second edition of the special talk series on Tibeto-Burman languages of Northeast India, organized by Tibeto-Burman Linguistics Association of Northeast India, which is in short we call as the TiBLANEI. This evening we have an invited speaker among us, which is one of the prominent scholars in the field of language and linguistics. So I, on behalf of TiBLANEI, would like to, welcome our today's speaker, Professor Pavel Ozerov. Before I invite today's chairperson, Dr. Bobita, to start the session, I would like to give a very short introduction on Professor Pavel Ozerov. Though he has a long list of his, how I say, bio notes or curriculum vitae, I would like to make it short. So, Professor Pavel is the chair General and Applied Linguistics at the Leopold Franzens University of Innsbruck, and his research focuses are confined in the area of information management and discourse structure, theory and typology, then spontaneous speech and linguistics of interaction, voice documentation and language description in Tibeto-Burmanic languages, Burmese, South Central, Kukichin, and Naga languages of Manipur, Nagaland, and Myanmar. And not last the least, it's the Israeli Hebrew also. So without any, I would like to invite Dr. Bobita Sarangtem to kindly chair the session and to start the session. Over to you, Dr. Bobita.
Thank you, Dr. Vizen. We are indeed very much privileged to have you, Professor Pavel, with us, and we all are waiting eagerly to hear from you. Today's topic on non-arbitrariness in language and grammar, idiophones and prosodic indices in Anal Naga is indeed a very interesting topic. So, Professor Pavel, the floor is open to you now. You can proceed with your presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Hi, everybody. And thank you very much, Manali and Vijen Kumar, for inviting me. And thank you, TiBLANEI, for this wonderful initiative and for this series that I hope will be interesting and beneficial as they have been until now. Thank you so much. So what I would want to discuss today is the role of what you can see in the title, non-arbitrariness in the language, which we'll discuss what it means, but the general idea is cases where the form of the sign, the form of the word, or the form of the intonation has direct mapping on the meaning. It's somehow the meaning is closely related to the actual form, and only very specific forms would fit to communicate this meaning, which is not the case in the language as usually, as we will see. And after some theoretical introduction on what it means, what we mean by non-arbitrariness and arbitrariness in language and communication, I would want to show you two case studies of such phenomena from Anal Naga, a language of Manipur, more known as just Anal. One, something like prosodic foregrounding or very unusual intonation or pitch. And the second one is what sometimes we know as expressives or dramatizers, and what is commonly now known in linguistic typology as idiophones. And what I would want to emphasize is how these phenomena are actually important, that often when you talk to linguists about these phenomena, and when you talk to speakers about these cases and point them out, they often glossed over as some kind of, oh, that's just funny words or this funny pitch that we do. But in fact, I would want to emphasize how actually interesting they are, how important they are, and how can they help us reshape our accepted knowledge about language and linguistics. And as such, invite follow-up studies from the many languages of the Northeast. And I will show why some phenomena coming up, some data coming up from these languages are particularly interesting. So I will start with introduction, two parts of the introduction. First, what is meant by arbitrariness, and the second is what is called idiophones, and then to two case studies from Anal Naga before concluding. So for introduction, well, there is this character in British folklore, English folklore called Humpty Dumpty that raised this question of why words mean what they actually mean. And as we can read in Lewis Carroll's famous book, the interaction between dialogue between Alice and Humpty Dumpty proceeded as follows. My name is Alice, but it's a stupid enough name, Humpty Dumpty interrupted impatiently. What does it mean? Must a name mean something? Alice asked doubtfully. Of course it must, Humpty Dumpty said with a short laugh. My name, Humpty Dumpty, means the shape I am, and a good hands-up shape it is too. With a name like yours, you might be any shape, almost. So we end up with this interesting idea that according to Humpty Dumpty, Alice can have any meaning whatsoever. You cannot predict the meaning of Alice. You cannot predict the shape of Alice, your appearance or whatever. But Humpty Dumpty really, by its form, by the shape of the words Humpty Dumpty, can mean only something specific, which is a good and handsome shape, probably some kind of round, biggish, happy creature. And upon hearing the word Humpty Dumpty, a speaker of English would somehow immediately imagine this set of properties. It would somehow call upon, well, that's what it is, as if there was some kind of immediate mapping between this form and the meaning, which is not there for other meanings. When you hear a name like Alice, you cannot predict what the meaning would be, but with Humpty Dumpty, it's somehow different. That is that shape, and something of a different shape would not be a good Humpty Dumpty. So that leads us to this classical view in linguistics that usually we perceive of linguistic sign to be arbitrary. And by arbitrary, since de Saussure, over 100 years ago, we know that what it means that there is no obligatory intrinsic link between the form and the meaning. The form is just the social convention of calling a specific thing. And any other social convention, as long as it is pronounceable in that language, would be equally good. Yeah, so if we take a certain animal like that, we cannot predict what this animal will be called in a language. It is just subject to the social convention of that community. Some community can call it a cat, and you have to learn that language to know that it's a cat. Other communities, like the couple languages I speak at home, will call it koshka or chatul, and there is nothing in the creature that would predict that it would be called chatul or cat. And in Anal Naga, it's jote, in Burmese, it's chow, and we cannot predict the form from the shape. We cannot predict the meaning from the form. Any form would do as long as it is the convention in the given community. And this is the idea of arbitrariness, that any form, as long as it is pronounceable, as long as it obeys the phonological constraints of the language, would do, and you have to learn that word. Now, this idea has been modified substantially in other views of communication, but not specifically for language. So there was a prominent American philosopher, Peirce, who presented many different kind of signs besides this arbitrary convention of a community. And what is discussed in linguistics from his theory are actually three kinds of signs. In his theory, there were some thousands of types of signs, but these words of a language, he called it symbol. It is just an arbitrary sign because of a social convention. Nothing in the form somehow naturally relates to the function. Nothing in the function somehow naturally predicts the form. But there are other types of signs, although not in language, just other types of signs in the nature when we understand one thing from another thing. For example, something that he called an index and can be just called as a pointer is a natural link between a form and the meaning. A natural here and now link. It's not about language, it's about you look at the nature around, you see one thing and you know It naturally relates to something else, and you infer there is something else is going on. Simple examples of our everyday life. If you see a smoke, you know that there is a here and now link of smoke to fire. There is no smoke without fire, and therefore once you see a smoke, you know there is fire somewhere. There is a natural here and now link from the way you know that the world works. Or if I come back home and I see your shoes and I know who you are, you are good friends, I see your shoes at the entrance of my home, I know from that that you are inside. Your shoes outside of my home signal to me, oh, you must be inside. I infer it from my knowledge of the world. So these are so-called pointers. The shoes outside of a house, your shoes point to me, oh, you must be inside. A smoke points to me, oh, there is a fire somewhere going on. But that's of course not a language. Smoke and shoes are not language. Where is it relevant for our communication? For example, in gesture. Yeah, when I point up to the right of me, that creates a pointer. That's a natural link between the form that points up and to the right and the attention being shifted up and to the right. There is a natural relationship between the form and the function that we immediately infer. Pointing up to the right will not be a good attention shift, will not be a good pointer to the left and down, because this shape only works out of the way we know the world works to look up. We know that when I shift my attention towards up and right, I start looking there. From seeing that I'm looking there and I'm doing something like this, you infer there must be something in the direction where I'm looking. There must be something in the direction where I'm pointing. So we have a natural link between the shape of this gesture, the direction, and something else going on in the world. So that's another type of the sign where we see something and that links us immediately to another thing going on in the world. We see a smoke, we know there is fire. We see this gesture, we know we have to look in the direction of the finger. And another shape, another form, something like this, will not work to shift your attention to the left or to the right. I need to point there. That's not just the convention. That's how the world works. The shape links to the meaning. And the last third relevant kind of a sign is so-called icon or just an image, which is imitation of reality. Like if I'm looking for a person, I can show you their photograph, their photo, their picture, and you will map just this precise image at the actual person. So showing an image. Now, in communication, again, we can see it in gesture. If I show you that the fish was that big, then this shows you directly the size of the fish. This presents an image of the size for you. So we can have other signs which are not like cat or dog, which are not arbitrary, but that point at things for us directly. Look there with the direction, or show us images. Now, do we have it in languages? Not really, so we would think, because when we speak, we use the voice, we use the vocal modality, and the voice is not a very good medium to present images, to show photos, to point at things around us, to present smells or pain or cognitive states, what I feel. Well, with voice, we cannot really do that. Voice is only good for imitating voice. So that's why we always think about images in voice as onomatopoeias, sound imitations. I can do moo, I can do ding dong, I can do meow, and so on, presenting other voices. Now, is it really the case that with a voice, all we can do is imitate other voices, other sounds, but that we cannot present some kind of images? It's almost true, but there was always some kind of exception that was bothering linguists, that there is always some kind of class of words that looks very much expressive, where the form is somehow unusual, where the form is clearly specific, special kind of form, and they somehow select for this kind of form. We know these words from English, for example, but it's a very small class. They're almost negligible. Zigzag, higgledy-piggledy, willy-nilly, tip-top, splish-splash, and our previous example, Humpty Dumpty, is one of them, of course. Now, these are not onomatopoeias. Tip-top or zigzag or Humpty Dumpty do not imitate sound. But it's also not the case that it's just whatever form works. It's cat, it's chatul, it's jote, it's chow, whatever, it works. Not really. We really see that the language here prefers a certain kind of a form that is better to communicate this meaning than something else, that any other form. Tip-top or hip-hop will only work with this kind of rhyming, chiming, alliterating forms, and replacing it with something just like bug will not create the same effect. There is some kind of effect that is produced by this unusual form. Well, it was acknowledged in the theory, but it was traditionally ignored or just marginalized, as this, famous quotation from Neumeyer's. The number of pictorial, imitative, or onomatopoeic items, non-derived words in any language is vanishingly small. That means we can safely ignore them for the sake of linguistic theory. However, looking around, languages from the rest of the world, not Europe, showed quite a different picture. For example, it was known since the 19th century that many African languages have huge sets of such items, hundreds. So this is a recent example from 2024, but this is documented since 1850s at least. Yeah, so if you take this language of Mozambique, something like Kope, sorry, I don't know anything more about this language, face, and then you add gada gada, it means big and open face. You add nyasi nyasi, it means upset face, ready to cry. Yara yara, false, joyful facial expression. Yezi yezi, out of control, like a drunk person. We see the same principle, the same idea, like with Humpty Dumpty, that there are certain forms, and they're again somehow rhyming, chiming, alliterating, that are better, and they're selected for this kind of meaning. Now, when we look closer to our area, we find also very large sets of these items in East Asian languages, and there has been a lot of work traditionally on that in Japanese, where you have hundreds of items, such as giri giri, barely doing something, or shira shira, fluttering, or kibi kibi, doing something very energetically, or Korean, also with not just many examples, but examples that in some works are counted up to 3,000 or even 30,000 items of this kind, making them the largest word class in Korean. There are many more of them than nouns or verbs together, and therefore, instead of being marginal to grammar and theory and linguistics, they are somehow at the very core of that. Now, nowadays, we know about these items from all around the world, from Austroasiatic languages, from Indo-Aryan, Quechua, North American, Australian Aboriginal languages, and that potentially emerges as maybe the only real cross-linguistic universal, that all spoken languages we know make some kind of playful use of phonology to achieve an equally playful, elusive, and somehow expressive meaning, to present an image to the listener. And if they were marginalized in the research, well, that's basically a result of theoretical assumptions that originate in their marginal status in European languages. So these items are nowadays called idiophones. In Southeast Asian linguistics, they're often called expressives, and there have been many other terms in the literature, as you can see in this very recent publication that really summarizes all the terms that were used for Kiranti branch of Tibeto-Burman. But especially following work of Mark Digemanze, it is called nowadays idiophone. And the way he defined that, a very influential definition, is marked words that depict sensory imagery. So these are words that somehow marked from the point of view of their form. The form is somehow unusual, and the meaning presents to the listener an image. It makes the listener imagine it. So from the point of view of the form, they are marked, so their form is somehow deviant. It is somehow different. They're often reduplicated like this shira shira or kibi kibi. They're often rhyming like humpty dumpty. In languages like many Tibeto-Burman languages where each morpheme is just a single syllable, they end up being two syllables. And the other way around, in many languages where the basic morpheme somehow would be disyllabic, as in some Tani languages, these items end up being monosyllabic. They are different. They keep this constant tension between behaving like language, but being somehow different. They use the same linguistics idea and structure, but then there is something unusual about them, like this reduplication and rhyming. As such, they have their own phonological system that somehow differs from the system of the rest of the grammar. Just like one example from Anal Naga, from a variety of a single village, where a very strong fire is described as krum krum, which otherwise would be impossible in this language. There is no initial onset. So this all kr shifted in the history to tr. It would be krum krum, but in this depiction of fire, it's still krum krum. It's a different phonological system, which is just a warning sign that when you describe or analyze phonology of a language, these kind of items, these kind of rhyming, chiming, strange, deviant items cannot be used as examples for the analysis. They behave differently. Now, from the point of view of the meaning, the form, we said it's somehow different. From the point of view of the meaning, what they do, they depict. Depict means they present an image. Somehow this sound evokes an image of an appearance, of a smell, of internal sensation like pain, of emotions like love or hate, although it's not very clear how sound can depict something. So what we know by now is that what it triggers is that it makes the listener imagine, not just understand what it means like with cat, but really imagine. So cat or Alice makes the listener just understand what you mean, but Humpty Dumpty makes an English speaker really imagine this round, funny, and joyful creature and its shape. It forces us to experience the image, although it's not very clear how it exactly works. One way in which they differ as well, and which is considered to be very important for evoking this image, is the detachment from everything else. So typically the form is detached. It's not part of any other larger morphological complex. It's not part of the verb. It's not part of the noun. That's where data that I'll be showing in a few minutes from Anal Naga will be interesting. They're not integrated morphologically. Often they're separated away with some kind of verb to say, having said bam, or having said splish splash, or something like that. They often shift into a different pitch range. They really use a different kind of intonation, and they're separated by pauses on both sides. Some items that we find in Anal Naga indeed behave that way. So they really have a deviant form. They have high pitch. They morphologically are not integrated within anything else, but separated by the verb to say. They also quote gesture to show what actually happens, as you can see. So we can hear this which depicts the crash, the fall of a very big tree or of something big. And you can see that something like bam, is separated by the verb say, literally having said boom, having said the tree broke at once. And you can hear that the speaker also shifts to a very different pitch. Not just that, but also this item does not behave as phonologically as an item in the language. So room is impossible according to the rules of Anal Naga, because long syllables cannot have the ng final coda. Such syllables instead became nasalized, and the the vowel shifted to U. So if it would be just a regular word in the language, it would be ru. But this is ru, ru, which otherwise is impossible. And as such, it is different, it is separated, it's pronounced with a very high pitch, and it makes us imagine how this big tree crashes, killing the protagonist of this story. So to sum up this part, before we move into case studies from Anal Naga, we have two kinds of non-arbitrary markers in communication, but it's not immediately clear how they relate to language. So they are there in the gesture, index, pointing, a pointer, look here, look there, smoke, look for the fire, point there, look, shift your attention to the direction. And, well, icons, yes and no, but there is depiction by ideophones, by this that trigger the speaker of the language to imagine the crashing tree. Although how it makes speakers imagine that instead of just understanding that is not entirely clear. And what we deal with is largely forms that are deviant, they're different, and they're detached. Now let's take a look at Anal Naga. So in general, just in Tibeto-Burman, such forms that I'll be describing are attested and described quite well for quite a few branches, and also for the South Central, or traditionally known as Kukichin branch, where Anal Naga belongs. There is quite a bit of work for Tidimchin, for Hakalai, for Kumi, and for Lamkan, but there is still much more to do. So Anal Naga, or just Anal, as it is typically called by the speakers, a South Central language from the northwestern group of South Central languages, spoken in Chandel district in Manipur by around 20,000 speakers. And we'll be looking at two phenomena in the language. The first one is something like prosodic pointer, using intonation to point at items, like vocal pointing. And the second, ideophones. And what I will be trying to show that these are really natural signs. They are signs that inherently map, link, form, and meaning, and as such are not arbitrary. And nonetheless, they really belong to the core niche, to the core grammar of the language. So let's first think of what a prosodic index, pointing with intonation, would look like. If index is this natural linking between form and meaning, smoke, look for a fire, pointing finger, look in that direction, there is something that you shift your attention to. I'm pointing and you know there is something interesting in that direction. You have to shift your attention from the form, from the shape of the finger. Then a prosodic pointer, a vocal pointer, would be something, doing something unusual with your voice that would signal to others, oh, the item where there was something unusual going on is special. I have to pay close attention to that. There is something special and interesting about that. And such items were described, for example, for English, where if you listen to the pronunciation of traffic in the following example, you can hear there is like a local special process going on that makes you shift your attention to traffic. Listen to that.
Well, the traffic, I was beside myself. I said, oh my goodness.
So in this case, the speaker doesn't say traffic, she says traffic, with this turbulent aspiration of T, with very long R, and with an extremely long, unusually long vowel. Listen to it again.
Well, the traffic, I was beside myself. I said, oh my goodness.
So this traffic, there is like a local pointer, there is a shift, unexpected shift in intonation and pronunciation, in phonology, that makes us say something is going on. I have to look at that. That's unusual. The speaker really did something unusual here. Oh, shift your attention here. And this is a sign that draws our attention at an item, but is done by the means of voice. What kind of markers of this kind do we have in Anal Naga? Instead of this very long consonant, what you have is shift to something, again, extremely unusual. But in this case, shift to a very high pitch, even reaching this falsetto voice, like a very high squeak. When you consult speakers about that, well, they say, well, it's just funny pronunciation that we sometimes do, just ignore that, that's nothing serious, nothing important. But if you look at that, turns out it's a very consistent phenomenon that occurs in regular places and communicates a very specific kind of meaning. So, for example, here it occurs in the verbal augmentative very, and you can hear what it sounds like. Let's listen again. So from the usual pitch, somewhere at the bottom of the speaker's pitch range, she suddenly shifts to a very high squeak, specifically that aligns very neatly at this augmentative emphasizer de, and then she goes back to calm. As such, it makes this pitch stick out and this item stick out from the rest, drawing our attention at that. As if she pointed by the means of her voice at this very. There are many up there, something like that. And if we look at the pitch track indeed, so she shifts from being somewhere around 180 hertz to over 400, which is unimaginable for a normal speech. So it is an extra high pitch, which points at the item where it occurs. I have heard that it's attested all across Northeast India, and specifically in the language we talk about, it varies between very strong accent to falsetto voice, or occasionally in a speech of men to something like barky voice, something like that. It is naturally salient by its shape, by its form. It draws our attention to it. As such, functioning as if it was pointing at the item where it occurs, and it neatly aligns with a single morpheme. Even without speaking the language, if I point, you will follow my finger. You don't need to know the language. Even without speaking the language, if I do something like that, you will understand this item is special. That was my first impression when I came to the community. I heard people squeaking around me and I realized this item is special, without speaking any language. So the sign, just like the pointing, is naturally attention drawing. You don't need to speak the language. But it's not just funny pronunciation. In fact, there are very specific grammatical rules where it can occur. It has a very limited distribution and cannot occur with lexical items like English traffic, but it selects very specific types of items. It can occur on distal demonstratives. It can occur at verbal modifiers or interjections of very specific kind, that something like depict. And it occurs at edge degree modifiers, nothing, everything, everybody, nobody, and so on. So first example, distal demonstrative over there, as we have in this example. You can hear the squeak on le over there. And as you see, it is combined with pointing gesture. It occurs at depicting very neatly, very accurately, and so on, as you can hear in this example. You could hear this clap. And sorry, it's finally animated, but it occurs with edge degree modifiers like very, a lot, everybody, precisely. And it seems to have almost conventionalized at items like nothing and nobody. So the most usual way to say nobody in the language is dara, nobody, something like that. As I had a voice somewhere here. Dara. So you can hear it sounds like a very strong accent, but when a usual accent is what you have on the following syllables around 150 hertz, this goes to 225. It's very unusually high for a male speaker. So all in all, we have a natural, non-arbitrary sign, which is a prosodic gesture pointing at a single morpheme and points for you by the means of the voice. Attention, that's something special. Evaluate that. Understand that. Think about that. Imagine that. Imagine that, therefore evoking this imaginative comprehension. It would traditionally be considered as something, well, something funny that we do. It's not part of the language, but is it really? Well, no, it's a language-specific marker. That's a marker that you have to learn when you learn the language. It doesn't work in English. In English, you do something else. It's traffic. It's not traffic. And it has very specific morphemes on which it occurs. You must learn these morphemes to learn the language. So what we end up with that it is a language-specific linking of form and function, of form and meaning, which has grammatical rules of distribution. It's a core part of language. It's a core part of grammar, although its shape is directly linked to its function. It wants to shift our attention at the specific morpheme, and what it does is drawing attention by all means possible, doing something very unusual with your voice, like going very high up to a squeak. So that was a prosodic index, a prosodic pointer, a prosodic shifter. And now we'll take a brief look at idiophones in Anal Naga before concluding. So idiophones, again, these are these marked words like Humpty Dumpty that are told to depict sensory image. They make the other speakers, the listeners, imagine, instead of just understand, but imagine a certain condition, pain, feeling, emotion, and so on. And as we mentioned, cross-linguistically, they're usually detached from everything else, just like what we could see this for Anal Naga. They're really detached as a separate word with a separate intonation, and so on and so on. Now, we also find these clearly deviant chiming, rhyming, alliterating morphemes in Anal Naga. And again, according to consultants, they're just these funny words that something we do. Consultants and speakers usually engage very joyfully in finding more and more and more of them, but regarding them as something being that unserious thing that we do, and you just ignore that. That's not really part of grammar that you should be bothered with, that should occupy you. You shouldn't be bothered with these things. But in fact, well, again, the reality is that they're very, very interesting. In particular, what is unusual, what we find in what we call Kuki-Chin traditionally, or now we call South Central languages, is that against this general cross-linguistic tendency, overwhelming tendency to separate the idiophone in pronunciation, in morphology, like room, just by itself, or Humpty Dumpty, just by itself, it's not part of anything else. What we find in these languages is that actually these items are deeply buried within the complex verbal morphology. They occur just after the stem and before all the suffixes. So if you take out the red part, it will be aum yenu. They were sitting in Anal, but the ye and nu are grammatical suffixes in the end. Aum is to sit, it's the stem, but the idiophones, very unusually, extremely unusually cross-linguistically, just shocking for typologists of idiophones, they go into the depth of the verb, deep into the verb. So for example, this is an example from a folktale, aum lelol yenu. And this lelol, just like Humpty Dumpty, you can hear this rhyming, chiming, means doing something in a very disordered, inappropriate way. In this case, it's people who had to be hiding because there was somebody looking for them. And instead of hiding, they were just sitting outside, eating and having a party so that everybody could see them. So describing that, it was lelol, very disordered, very inappropriate. And there are two clear groups of these items. One is what I call pseudo-reduplications. So when you have the same syllable being repeated twice, but if you try to have just this syllable once, that's meaningless. It must be repeated, and only then it has a meaning. So these usually depict pain or emotions or appearance. For example, tu, many items doing something in parallels with high density inside. Du, many things moving next to each other, but with less density. Tol, doing something while walking with big steps, or tal with short steps. Ruru, while experiencing strong emotions. Jui, with pain bursting from within. Rum, with very loud or painful way. Cho, with many people making some kind of noise, and all of these items, as you can see, they go after the stem and before the suffixes. So in this case, for example, han, chun, cha, tutuka, or titika, they all ran, and tutu means one by one for big individuals, and titi means for small individuals. Changing sounds, changing vowels is meaningful here. We can hear that. Yeah, sorry, the speaker is very fast. It's natural conversation. Or in this case, they were to cry, they all were crying, but not just crying, but cho-cho crying, which means it's parallel voice noise production of many people that the speaker finds somehow annoying. So this cho-cho. Or are you dizzy, but not just dizzy, but ru dizzy, which specifies a certain high degree of pain or dizziness. Yeah, so we see these reduplicated items, but there is no just tu, there is no just cho, there is no just ru. It's only reduplication. That's one pattern. And the other pattern turns out to be very interestingly and very systematic. So what we have here is that we have a pattern of consonants, and then the vowels within these consonants can change and produce change in meaning. So for example, ming mung is something piled and packed to high density. If you change the second vowel to a, ming mang, it's also packed to high density, but somehow that you find it to be very cute. And if from ming mung, you shift the first vowel to mung mung, it is the dynamic process of seeing something being packed more and more and more. Pim pum, something very round and chubby, but if it's a child who is cute because of being chubby, it's not pim pum, but pim pam. And if you watch a chubby person moving, then you describe it as being pum pum moving. In the same way, king kung, stiff and strong, king kang, small, compact and full of energy like a child, and kung kung, somebody who is king kung, moving all around. Tin tung, tin tan, tung tung, and so on, so on, so on. Similar pattern, but with different vowels, e, o, but with the same idea, den don, den dan, don don, ten ton, ten tan, ton ton, and again, the same meaning difference. The first is presenting a static image. So ten ton is the image of something, somebody being crooked and disformed. If it is small and cute, then it's not ten ton, but ten tan. And if you look at a crooked thing moving around, then this motion is depicted as ton ton. And in the same way, sel sol, sel sal, sol sol, le lo, le la, lo lo, ne no, ne na, no no, sorry. Yeah, so again, for example, describing chubby person swinging. Asang is to swing, asang, no, no, swinging in a chubby way. Or describing little calves who are also cute. Instead of no, no is a dynamic one. Ne, no is the image. Ne, na is a cute image. So because the newborn calves are so cute, the speaker describes them as being ne, na, fat, mal, fat, ne, na, but cute. They are cute. And so on, so on, so on. So we have many forms of this kind. Until now, I collected around 150 forms, but probably there are more, around 70 patterns of consonants. So it is a very big, a very substantial class in the language. But cross-linguistically, they are very unusual. They are not detached. They're really deep inside the verbal morphology. And nonetheless, they also create the effect of depiction. Depiction that was linked to both being this Humpty Dumpty, this rhyming, alliteration, chiming, and detachment. Turns out these languages, Kuki-Chin, South Central languages tell us detachment is not necessary there. It's something very much unusual. Also, what you find strangely that this cuteness diminutive, we have the vowel a for that. Usually vowel a, if it's used to depict in ideophones, it's for big things, e for small things or for cute things, not in Analnaga, also not in Hakalai from the same group. A actually is for diminutive, extremely unusual cross-linguistically, also very interesting theoretically. So where do they come from? What are these items? Well, interestingly enough, as it turns out, all of these items are linked to usual, non-arbitrary morphemes in the language, which comes out. Speakers somehow do not have this intuition, but when you look at how they actually speak, you find these examples all around. So, for example, in this case, one person, the people describe how a certain path became impassable because of rain and this water stagnating there. And one person says, oh, it stagnates, boom, boom, just adding the description saying in a round form. But the other speaker upgrades poom to beam boom, making the others really visualize that. So what he does is that he takes a usual form poom that has nothing special. It's not rhyming, it's not alliterating, it's not chiming, it's just a usual form in the language. It's arbitrary form. And he repeats that, changing the vowel. And that repetition, meaningless repetition, what makes it special, makes it unusual, and makes others pay attention to that. Oh, something is going on. Oh, he is doing something unusual. Let's see if you can hear that. Okay, so the first speaker says ading pum nu, and the other one repeats it as ading pim pum nu, upgrading that and making an idiophone out of a usual. So in fact, then we can see that there are 150 for now of idiophones, but actually they are linked to usual modifiers, verbal modifiers. They preserve the second syllable, but change the vowel in the first one. So there is ming mung for abundant and densely packed. This can also be described as mung, but once you use ming mung for that, that really makes the others imagine that. There is boom for being round or chubby. You upgrade it with pim boom by repeating the syllable with vowel change, making it, wow, idiophone. You imagine that. And in the same way, there is kung for being stiff and king kung as an idiophone. There is jul for doing something secretly and jil jul for doing something in a sly and cunning way, and so on. For every single idiophone that you find, there is the original non-idiophonic verbal modifier of this kind. So what we have then is that we have these monosyllabic verbal modifiers, called also by Mark Post predicate derivations, like no to be round-shaped or rang to do something neatly. Then you can reduplicate them to achieve more effective meaning, no, really round-shaped, rang, really neatly. But then if the vowel is u or o, both vowels involve labialization, you can remove the labialization on the first syllable, leave it just staying with o, e, or u, e. So no gives you ne, no, kung gives you king, kung, and removing this labialization makes it unusual, makes the first syllable meaningless, and makes this effect, creates this effect of, oh, something is going on. It's something unusual. I have to pay closer attention to that. I have to imagine that. And then further in, we also have this option of having diminutives. So what we end up with, that actually depiction like Humpty Dumpty, is not some kind of marginal, outlandish part, small part of a lexicon, but actually it's part of morphological processes in the language. Depiction is straightforwardly available. Idiophones are straightforwardly available as being derived from 4 usual arbitrary items in the language, just from other verbal modifiers, from other words. So all in all, we end up with forms that are naturally unusual. They are naturally deviant because there is repetition, king kung, lelol, ming mung. There is repetition, alliteration. There is some kind of rhyming, lolol, lelol. Such repetitions almost never occur in the language. We tend to avoid similar sounds. That's a very robust finding cross-linguistically. Repeating the same sound, laka lapa ta 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 lapa lapa la, this ta 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 was sticking out for you when I was doing that. Because repeating the same sound is unusual, and it's also physiologically demanding. We slow down the speech rate while we are doing that. And also what we end up with is that in a language like Anal Naga, where every syllable has meaning, there is a meaningless syllable, and that's unusual. So all of these factors point towards something unusual is going on. Pay attention. That's rhyming, that's chiming, that's repeating the same sound. It's meaningless syllable that never occurs. The speaker is doing something unusual, and we are forced by this unusual form to pay closer attention. It is a naturally attention-drawing form. So ideophones are, by their design, they draw attention because of their form. A different form would not have this effect. So the meaning is naturally linked to form. Unlike cat, that any form would do, only Ming Mung can make others imagine these things, and it's being densely packed because of being unusual, because of drawing attention. So again, we have a sign that is rooted in our natural distribution of attention. We pay attention to unusual things. We pay attention to things that naturally different, stick out, require more physiological effort, like shifting our voice up or repeating the same sound. You could hear this. Ta, ta, ta. And yet, although there is a natural link between the form and the meaning, although it is not arbitrary like cat or a dog, we still see that it is part and parcel of language and its grammar. It sits deep inside the verb, and it's rooted in morphological process of the language. So to sum it up, linguistic items were traditionally considered to be arbitrary, where the meaning and the form is just a social coincidence, just an accident that this form was mapped at this meaning, like cat was mapped at this animal, and also chang would be mapped and was mapped if you speak Burmese. What we see now that linguistic models shift to include many different signs where the lexicon is largely indeed arbitrary, but there are many classes of signs that are not, because different kinds of signs are functional in natural communication, and language extends beyond the limits that we wanted to assign to it originally. But what we learn from the languages of Northeast India is first that typological generalizations leak. Ideophones are deeply within verbal morphology, they're not detached. We have apodiminutives, but even more important, these items, in spite of being embedded deeply inside the morphology, in spite of being so unusual, they still draw attention. And this imagination that is required from the listeners is actually a product of this naturally attention-drawing science. It's about this natural property of attention drawing, which links to deviation from expectations, to being unusual, and to investment of effort on the side of the speaker, like in shifting your pitch up. So we do have place for these kind of signs in grammar, in the core grammar of language, as Anal Naga shows that to us. And it's not just funny words or funny intonation, but that really sheds new light at what language is about and how natural aspects of cognition and communication shape language form and language grammar. And thank you very much for using the prosodic for grounding in Anal Imhanam Paka. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pavel, for your enlightening presentation. And your insights were truly valuable. I think from the participants, if you have any queries or questions, now the floor is open for discussions. So if you want to ask any questions, you are welcome now from the participant.
I have a fairly simple one.
Yes, please go ahead.
So thank you, Pavel. That was great. I ran into this prosodic focusing when I was doing my research in 2016 and on for my PhD, where you would have the houses far away, you would have it always on the kind of adjective because there wasn't an augmentative per se. And it was, since I was doing a tone study, the thing I was sort of curious about at the time is if there was any sort of system behind how much of a pitch jump it is. Whether it's something like hitting the top end of the tone space, or whether it's an octave, or whether there's something like that. And the answer I always got from speakers when I tried to talk to them about this is, oh, that's just something people do. Don't pay attention to it, right? Because they thought that this is going to become a prescriptive tone kind of primer or something like that. I wonder if this is something that you've looked into at all about how much of a different relative level this is, or is it really just so speaker dependent that there's nothing to be said about it?
Thank you, Kellen. Yeah, I did look into that. That was when I still was working with a corpus of narratives rather than spoken language, as I have the new corpus now. And in the narratives, what was really salient is that the highest pitch you got it at narrative climax, at the actual point of the narrative. It wasn't about how far it was, but it was how much the speaker was involved, and therefore how much really they wanted to get you on board, how much your attention they wanted. There was another aspect to that, that there was, it usually also comes with a vowel lengthening, and that vowel lengthening seems to be rather iconic. It seems to represent what you actually talk about. So if you say it's far away, then it's quite far. If you say it's far away, that's really far. And traditionally, the storytelling starts with once upon a time, and this is very long, meaning it was really, really long time ago. And again, it seems the length there stands for the actual length of the time or the distance. And it's also interesting that your first example is far away or something like that. Because I just was trying to go through grammars of Tibeto-Burman languages if they mention something like that. And if there is something that comes up consistently, is the distal demonstrative, it's over there. And it really, in some cases, you really find descriptions for languages of Nepal and Bhutan saying, and the item over there can only occur with funny, very high pitch or something like that. Thank you.
The Tangsa has a distal demonstrative ikara, which is already sort of emphatic, but then there's an ikara when it's like really far away. And so it is happening exactly in the demonstrative, but also any kind of adjective in Tangsa and Nokte and Vancho and a few of these others that I work on, the adjective itself is also going to get kicked up no matter what it is, if it's meant to be emphasized. So thank you. That was really interesting.
Amazing. Thank you. And that's the most interesting part that is still not properly described. So I strongly assume you would have parallel cases in all the languages around, and each of them would be a great contribution if you bring it up, if you discuss it. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, we can take some more questions if any queries from the participants.
I would just like to add one observation, because it's very interesting that since these are Tibeto-Burman languages, it's also very similar to how it works in Dimasa, the language which I have worked on. So we usually have these oo for more dynamic and moving kind of words, and we have these EE or AA for more, which is like more cute, or things which are small. So it's quite interesting, I think, and this is so understudied. So anyway, thank you so much, Pavel.
Thank you
Gives
very
us
much.
new
That's
insight.
interesting. Yeah, and this is something, that you find being reported cross-linguistically, for example, that E and E, the closed vowels, they go together with small size, and A and U, the back vowels, sorry, it's front and back, the back vowels, they go with big size. And in some cases, it does work that way in Anal. So there are these do and DD, which depict both many things moving together, but do for adults and DD for children. But on the other hand, there is A that is used for cuteness, which is just not heard of, and here it is. Yeah, and well, the same reported for Hakalai, which is from the same branch, right, South Central Kukichin, but far away in Myanmar, which makes us think maybe it is something that can be even reconstructed to Proto-Kukichin.
Interesting.
Yeah. So if we do not have any more questions from the
I have one
participants.
small question also.
Okay, okay, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, that was a great talk. Really enjoyed it. My question is very simple. Simple. Is this feature, the idiophone, widely prevalent in the language, or is it only the elderly who can really exploit this usage, and not so much with the younger? And if the younger speakers, stop acquiring such idiophones and other expressive, in what way will it hamper the cognitive ability of expression in the language?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you. Yes, I did not look in detail into this cross-generation variation. For now, I would say it is used frequently. So I looked at spontaneous language, for example, and I have something like 1.5 cases per minute of conversation, which is a lot. I would assume that it's strongly there. I also had the impression that when I tried to elicit that, it was always almost like a big party. Oh, you want the funny words. And many people joined in, including the younger ones, and younger consultants had no problem to come up with more or discuss them. So I don't have the impression that they would be on the way out and that they would be replaced. But that's, of course, not something I looked in detail into, and this is something that's very important. And there have been studies for other languages. There were reports, for example, from native North American languages, where they looked at the usage of idiophones as sign of vitality of language, that these things are indeed the first to give up and fall out. There is a recent description of intensifiers in tiny languages that describes this amazing and very sophisticated system by Jan Kimodi and Mark Post. They also mention that somehow for younger generation, the usage of these reduced, and they borrowed English word danger to have it to use as a general emphasizer. So if before there was a special idiophone like for sweetness and a special idiophone like for being quick, now in new generation is danger sweet, danger quick, danger big, and so on and so on. So they really give up, and that's a very interesting idea, yes, that to maybe you can, just like it has been done for North American languages, you can look into the usage of these to see the vitality of the language. Thank you very much. That's a great idea.
Yeah, that's very supportive. So I also consider that the amount of idiophones that speakers use is a sign that the language is still very robust. And also the peculiar thing that you talk about is that when you express something like something which is very far, the use of a high pitch intonation, these are also quite peculiar to elderly speakers and not so much peculiar to younger speakers, at least for my language, Thado. So even my children don't pick up all these idiophones and also the intonation which express emphasis of or distance or whatever, or intensity or whatever. So these are good signs of how much the language is prevalent, and it can be easily lost out. That's my feeling.
Really interesting. Yeah, also interesting that you say about the distal demonstrative, because when I just was making my first steps in the language, it was eliciting how do you say here, hey, how do you say there, hey, how do you say over there? Like, what did you do? Hey, hey. And it seemed that also the younger speakers, it felt very unnatural for them to produce the distal demonstrative without that. And there were some men that instead used like a barking voice, le, something like that. But it was very strongly there. Yes, it's very interesting, yeah, to really look into these as some
Okay,
kind of.
finally, one must be your probable explanation as to why some languages have more of this expressive, including ideophones, compared to others, which have less dependent, lesser number of usage. What could be the scientific explanation behind this?
I don't think I can provide instant explanation. I don't think there is a clear one. And there are a few interesting things. One issue that is has been reported is that for most of the cases, once the language becomes written, somehow they disappear. And this is the case with most of West European languages that marginalize this idea so strongly, saying, well, that's just some funny things. They never made it into writing. They made it into writing in Japanese, where as such, they also exploded. So there are many, many, many of them. And another issue that can create proliferation of those is some kind of productive vowel changing or sound changing patterns. So for example, in Korean, there are many of them, maybe 1,000 or 2,000, but for each of them, there is also this opposition of voicing. So if it starts with voiced or voiceless, b or p can stand for a size, if it's big or small. The same goes for vowel, if it's u or e or e. And then you get, from a single idiophone, you get 4, 5, 6, subject to how many vowel changes you have. And the same happens here in anal, that from a single replication mung mung, you can get ming mung and ming mang with vowel changes, and that triples the whole inventory. Yeah, so I maybe come up with 50 consonant patterns, but that already leads to 150 idiophones because each has 3 types of vocalization. Yeah, so having this productive vowel changing or consonant changing patterns, of course, inflates the system. But otherwise, it is not very clear, but it does seem, and it has been also reported from South Africa and from North American languages, that once the language is put into writing, that consolidates these items that are somehow associated, well, they are natural. They're really natural type of behavior. They really work when you draw attention to something in speech, and they don't look very good in writing. And it seems that once the language establishes a strong written tradition, they are lost. There is this impression. It's not the case for Japanese and Korean, for example. So it's not absolute universal, but there is some kind of tendency of this kind.
Okay, fully agree that the explanation that you gave there. Once the language is written, then it seems we get to lose some of these things. So my final observation is I have 2 points. One is I have seen your tone mark with this pitch marking, tone marking, intonation of the reduplicated syllable containing the same syllable. So this is true for so many of the cookie chain languages I've looked at. So they have the same form in both the same pitch in the replicated forms. So that is one thing. And another final question is that it's something that I am wondering. So perhaps much of this, what you call idiophones and expressive, have to do with the terrain and also with the environment, the ecosystem they live in. And then once these ecosystems are disrupted, somehow this also could have an impact on that. This is my observation. I don't know what is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I can add the last point, and I believe you know much more than I do about the ecosystem. Yeah, I don't have this clear linkage between them. Yeah, so it's yeah. Thank you for that. Would be very interesting to look into.
So, are there any more questions? If so, we can take it up. I think there is no more questions. Thank you, Dr. Pavel. Now I would like to hand over to Dr. Bijen Kumar. Over to you, Dr. Bijen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Govita, for your smooth navigating of the session. Thank you to the speaker also. Now I would like to invite Dr. Monali Longmalai to kindly propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Bijen and Dr. Govita for being a good team member in helping in organizing the special talk series. And Professor Pavel, huge thanks to you for accepting our invitation and for giving us such wonderful insights into the idiophones and prosodic indices in Anal Naga. And I hope that this brings some new interest, research interest among the young Tibeto-Burman scholars who are present here in the session today, and also when they watch this video, as this video will be available in our YouTube channel very soon. Thank you so much, Professor Pavel, and thank you, everyone. I'd also like to make a small announcement that this will be the last talk for this month, for this special Tibeto-Burman talk series. We will be resuming in January. So this is all from my side. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very
Good
much.
night.
Thank you.
Good night.